Welcome to a special edition of Straight Out of Politics. I'm joined, or this special edition is actually the first part or the first episode in a series that I would hope to work on or actually complete. And the series is called "The Traumatic Effects of America and the American Political System on the Black community." And today's episode is centering in or zeroing in on this topic or this subtopic, which is the role of the state and political sphere in the enactment of racial oppression. And I have one more guest will be joining. For those that know the have seen my stream, you know this the guest that's missing. Professor Anthony Zenkus will be joining us soon. He's running a tad bit late. But you may see one familiar face and a new face here. So I'll introduce Doctor. I call him Doctor Karim, but I'll of course allow him to give his full introduction. So if you could just give us your name, kind of where you teach, and just briefly sort of what sort of work you do.
Yeah, great to be back, CJ. Good to see you both. Yeah, my name is Dr. Karim Bettache. I live in Hong Kong. I work here as a professor at the university. I teach. I'm special. I specialize in cultural psychology and sociological psychology. I teach for the Department of Global Political Economy, and I focus a lot on how culture interacts with our individual mind, our individual behavior, to actually to maintain and reproduce discriminatory behavior, and especially how our cultural system continuously reproduces in us racist behaviors, but also racist sentiments towards ourselves. So that is a bit in very, very quickly the kind of stuff that I'm very interested in. And of course, then I focus a lot on large cultural systems such as capitalism, colonialism, and white supremacy. I find these three large cultural systems / ideologies very, very interesting.
Absolutely, and just just your description of it perks my ears up. So been waiting a long time for this conversation, to be quite honest with you. And so we have a new person, or maybe I should say a new face to this network. And I would like to welcome I'm not sure if you're a doctor, but Professor Michael Rosino. Are you a doctor, sir?
Yes, I am a doctor. I'm a
Absolutely.
doctor in the old school sense, before medical doctors came along and tried to claim to be the only doctors.
Right
Um,
on, right on. So
yeah,
same thing. So if you could just kind of give us, kind of describe, tell us who you are, where you teach, and maybe a little bit about what sort of work you do related to the topic.
sure. Yeah. So, I'm Michael Rosino. I am a professor of sociology at Malloy College, which is on Long Island in New York. I live in Brooklyn. I mostly study, I guess I would call it just racial politics broadly. And I'm really interested in questions around how um, political parties, political actors, policies, the government, broadly speaking, how it contributes to racial oppression, how it sort of impacts our day to day lives, and how it sort of carves up social space, how it creates categories. Yeah, and so I'm really excited to be here. Uh, and talk with some psychologists, because I'm probably not the expert when it comes to something like trauma or how any of this is affecting
Mm.
people psychologically. But when it comes to the big picture, sort of the macro perspective on particularly the U.S. State, that's something that I've been spending a lot of time researching and working on.
Right. So what you describe and what you are not is actually what the next our next guest is. And he's been on the show a lot, or actually the network, I should say. I'm not necessarily the show, but he's been on this network. He's contributed to the general strike. We greatly appreciate it. Several conversations around trauma. And this is friend of the show, always friend of the show, always happy to have you on.
Thank you.
Professor Anthony
You
Zenkus,
didn't
how are
say that
you?
yet. Yeah, actually, I haven't been on the show. I've been boycotting the show because of the $100 million contract you got, and you continue
Exactly.
to spread COVID misinformation, and I want you to stop. Hi, how are you?
Hey.
Everybody.
So, yeah, if you could tell us, like, just for those who may not know, that's new, who you are, where you teach, and what you do, and how it relates to the topic.
Great, and I'm excited to be here with the illustrious panel, one who I don't know yet, but I'm getting to know. Oh, and you teach at Malloy, which is great. I teach at Columbia, but I also teach at Adelphi, not far from Malloy.
Great.
And I have lectured at Malloy on sexual violence and relationship violence and misogyny and things like that. So I've done that many times there. It's a wonderful place. So I teach at Columbia University, but I also teach at Adelphi University. My specialty is trauma, really, how when human beings are coping mechanisms overwhelmed by something in the social environment. And I started this journey by doing what I just mentioned a minute ago, which is looking at the trauma from things like sexual abuse or rape or child abuse or domestic violence. And then I expanded it. So now I look a lot at the impact that the social environment that we create in our society, that our government creates, how that causes trauma. And specifically how it causes, and Jay, you and I have spoken about this, how it causes trauma due to racism, to poverty and inequality, to lack of power, and that basically our current American model as it exists now is, and I've come to the conclusion, is exactly designed to cause such great trauma that those in power continue to feel comfortable that the people won't be able to coalesce and rebel. And when I say rebel, I mean like politically change the system that we have. But the impacts of the trauma, and the last thing I'll say is that the impacts of trauma occur on a multidimensional space. They occur physically, psychologically, and emotionally, socially, as well as spiritually. And I'm excited to explore that with all of you today.
Absolutely. So I just think we have a great combination of expertise, if you will, or background. And that's the reason why when I came across Dr. Michael, I'll just call you that. So Dr. Michael, when I came across your profile, I just happenstance, I clicked on, I can't remember what it was, either a retweet. And then I saw in your profile racial politics, and I was like, wow, this is the missing link we've been looking for this conversation. And so I'm happy to have the three of you on for this conversation. So again, for our audience, I just want everyone to know there's no way for us to examine or discuss this topic in one episode. There's simply no way to do that. So, and I'm not sure how many it's going to take. I think we all will just kind of say, okay, we feel like we've addressed it enough, and whatever amount of episodes that's at, that's what we're gonna kind of go with. So we'll kind of go with the flow. But I do know what we need to start with is a baseline of understanding of just what is oppression. So starting there, just getting an understanding of that and talking about that. So I want to start with Dr. Karim. What is your definition, or how do you define, is a better way of saying, not what is your definition, but how do you define oppression?
Yeah, I think that is very difficult because there are so many forms of oppression.
Mm-hmm.
But let me tell you something about how I often see something like racism, because we are talking about racism a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what is very important to understand, and it sounds very straightforward, and there are people who do understand it, and luckily, increasingly, more and more people understand that. But what we must understand when it comes to racism is that we must go to culture. Okay, culture, in cultural psychology, we say that culture is a meaning system. Okay, culture attaches meaning to everything we perceive. Okay, so racism is also rooted in culture and not in human beings in and of themselves. Okay, we often naturalize racism as if it's something natural because we evolved as intergroup competitive kind of beings and therefore we are racist. No, this is not true, because when we were competitive intergroup competitive beings in the time of the hunter gatherers, for example, everybody looked alike, so it was not based on racial features. Okay, it
Mm-hmm.
was within continents and then neighboring groups. So racism in and of itself is not a natural phenomenon that we compete as human beings between different categories of groups. That's natural. That's our tribalism. But based on what kind of characteristics we deem someone else in a different group changes over time and place. That can be religion, that can be race. Now we have one of the worst systems because it's based on phenotypic features, something you can immediately see. So it's very hard to get rid of. Now, why is it so important to understand that racism is rooted in culture? Most people who have a problem with black people or Muslims or whatever group of people do not hate them because of experiences in their lives. In fact, most people who hate them don't have ever met a black person in their life. So what is very important is that we must understand that they learned to hate them. Okay, and they learn to hate them through culture. That is also why racism is so pervasive. You can engage in anti-bias training, for example. Think about the police anti-bias training and then trying to change the individual. But if the individual goes back into a world where he sees continuous status differences between people, the old biases come back into the brain.
Right.
Okay, and this is also to get to your point of trauma, CJ. This is also why racism is so traumatic for discriminated people. Why? Because those who grow up in a racist culture start to look at themselves through their own cultural lens, through their own cultural eye. That is deeply traumatic for discriminated people. Okay, the fact that your phenotype, your skin color, your nose shape, your hair shape, the fact that your phenotype and your cultural background are under constant demonization are so destructive for your self esteem, your mental health, and life satisfaction. This is something that needs way more attention, in my opinion. People look into the mirror and they see themselves through their own cultural eyes. Think about when you have prototypical
Mm.
features, dark skin, or like when you're Semitic, Semitic curved nose, for example. All these things influence the way you see yourself, and why? Because of your culture. And finally, before I talk too long, this is also why I hate it when people who come from non-discriminated backgrounds, for example, majority group members, often say so quickly, "Oh, you people pull the victim card." I hate that when people say the victim card, because they've never experienced the constant demonization of your being by your own culture. Okay, so that is for me very important to understand, how your culture shapes in your mind, okay, discriminated thoughts and feelings that can actually aim at yourself. Okay, I'll
I,
leave it at
I
that.
I I like the way you answer the question because it was not a what is oppression, but you gave a specific example of what oppression can do, and I guess I would look at racism as oppression, as a type of oppression that inflicts this type of trauma and pain. But let's go to Dr. Michael. I think I'll just do it that way.
Sure,
Dr.
why
Michael,
not?
Dr. Karim. Yeah. So Dr. Michael, same question. I'll allow you. Not that I'm allowing you, but you can answer it however you would like. But same question.
Sure.
How would you describe or define oppression?
Sure. So I take a more sort of sociological perspective in the sense that I think oppression is ultimately describing a kind of social relationship between groups. It's not only helping to maintain and reproduce the boundaries between groups, but it is all of those actions in aggregate that are maintaining a social relationship. And that's a social relationship that's based on basically a power imbalance, where one group or multiple groups are locked out or pushed down from positions of formal and informal power, are exploited, maybe have likely are actively dehumanized by people in power. And I also think it's important to recognize that when we talk about a form of oppression like racism, we're talking about something that's both structural and active. So, like, we can identify these specific actions that are reinforcing racial oppression, and that's something that I seek to do in my work, and a lot of other scholars do, and obviously, activists do this kind of work as well in their own communities and in their own ways. But I also think we need to look at the social structure, so that there are actual social arrangements and formal and informal rules in our institutions that are creating these power and resource flows that are operating in a particular way. So I kind of wanted to kind of add that additional element of, when we talk about racism, I think it's important to not just think about sort of the interpersonal dynamics, and those are obviously really crucial, and especially the cultural dynamics. But also there's a structural dynamic when we look at how institutions and systems are actually set up, who they benefit, who has the ability to influence how they're operating. All of those questions and these questions of power, they're playing out on sort of a larger like system scale. So I think when we take that kind of vantage point, it opens up the terrain a lot more to sort of think about points of combating racial oppression, looking at the broad social impacts of racial oppression, and even, with thinking about like just sort of pragmatic issues of strategy.
Absolutely. Again, love the way you answered that question. It's really, I think, I know it's just the first round of questions, but I'm really seeing a difference in the way you answer the question. I can see your backgrounds in those answers, if you can kind of understand what I'm saying. So I can clearly see Dr. Karim's background and how he described and answered that in yours. And that's what we need. We need the marriage of all these different expertise together to kind of understand this, in my opinion. So let's go to Professor Anthony. I'll call you by your first name only because I'm calling everybody else. So Professor Anthony, same sort of question or same question. How would you define, describe, or relate the word or concept of oppression in this context? I think you're muted. Yes, you're muted. There you go.
I like Paulo Freire's definition. He was a radical educator in Brazil and wrote one of the greatest books I think I've ever read, called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And he defined oppression as people's perverse tendency to deprive other people of freedom and happiness. And, I think building on what was said by the other two guests, I mean, this idea of oppression is a disruption and a disturbance in our social environment, which is meant to be cooperative. And I do get what Dr. Karim says about the tribalism, because it is true. You know, we had groups of like 100, 150. And so there was competition if resources were scarce between those groups. But again, it was never based on a trait. It was based on just, I need to survive. There's only a limited amount of water. And if you can't go anywhere else, right? But for ultimately, the human story, and actually the biological story, is the story of cooperation. Nothing works without it. And all the cells in our body work together in a cooperative community of cells that causes us to be an organism. And that, you know, and when there are cells that don't in our body act in a cooperative way, and they act in a selfish way, and they band together to be selfish, those cells are cancer cells, and they can make us sick or kill us. And I think of oppression in the same way. You know, we've got a dynamic where oppression is the vehicle, is the tool that's used by people who have power and don't deserve it, and who are hoarding power, to make sure they don't have to share it. You know, no one's born hating anybody because of the color of their skin or their gender expression or anything. And the thing that's sad is there's two levels of it. Both the other guests hit on was that there is that level that's personal, where someone just has this irrational response and reaction and hatred or you know, just terrible feeling of another person who's a member of a different group, whether it's because of the color of their skin or whatever, or their country of origin. But then there's the other element, which is the people on top don't, like, I don't know that Donald Trump has personal hatred toward black people, but I know he could use those that did to hoard power. So there's that other level, which is at the ultimate level. You know, I look at the relationship between a victim of domestic intimate partner violence and their perpetrator. It's based on keeping them in the dark about the true nature of power in that relationship. It's about that perpetrator maintaining ultimate power and control of every aspect of that victim's life, including socially isolating them and cutting them off from seeing that there might be others living differently and that there may be people that could help them. Ultimately, to keep that person, you know, if the dynamic is, say, a man who's a perpetrator and they're married to their victim, keep that person basically as a slave who can perform duties and tasks for them. And when you take it from that micro into the macro, it's the same thing, right? So like just the trope that many who are white supremacists and racists would say for years, saying that black people don't like to work. Well, who built this nation? Africans built this nation. That's a pretty ambitious thing for people who don't like to work. Africans also built the pyramids and had architecture and science long before European civilizations did. So it's this thing like, well, we're going to say these terrible things about them to deny them rights, but we need them to maintain our hoarding of power. And so we can build institutions that allow us to continue to exploit others, the global South especially, and people in our own country as well. And it's based on this perverse notion that if I hoard power, I'm going to live longer, be happier, feel better. And I will throw this out. There's scientific basis to that. If you take two monkeys and put them in a cage, and they've never met each other. One becomes the dominant monkey and the other becomes the subordinate monkey. Not too long after that, the subordinate monkey starts to get sick. Over time, that subordinate monkey will find after it dies, much younger than the dominant monkey, there'll be a degradation of the frontal lobe, gray matter area of the brain, not as developed as ours. The adrenal glands, which are responsible for the stress response, will be swollen because they would have been used so much. The hippocampus will be degraded. That's where memories are. But the amygdala, which is the brain's alarm system, will be swollen. What does that mean? You stress a rat out, the same thing. The hair falls out, the teeth fall out, they die younger. If you look at the life expectancy of people who are poor or Black Americans in our country, far lower than those that are wealthy or those that are white. And so there's a reason for this, because there is a secret here. And the secret is those on top know that their ability to stay on top adds years to their life and makes them believe that they're happier. There's a perverseness about that. And it's based on the belief that power is a limited source and it can't be shared, because then I won't stand out and I won't matter. And the last thing I'll say about it is, like, there are literally people, and I see this in Democrats a lot lately, even more so than Republicans, who basically have this attitude that their having healthcare doesn't mean much if everybody has it. It's a bizarre, bizarre thing. And it's this feeling of, I need to be special. I need to be on top, because if I'm on top, I'll do better. And the reality is people on top actually do better. They're worse people. I hope I didn't meander too much with that answer.
No, not at all. There's actually, you touched upon the second question. So let me go there. It's, why would another group of people want to oppress another group of people? And you kind of touched upon their thinking. So I'll start with you, Professor Anthony. Why would somebody want to oppress? Like, what is the advantage? What is actually, I won't narrow the question anymore. Let's just keep it there, a broader question, so you can take it how you want. Why would somebody want to oppress somebody?
Well, remember I said that that trauma occurs on multiple levels: biological, psychological, emotional, social, and spiritual. Let's not forget that spiritual element, because I started talking about that at the end of what I just said. So yeah, on the surface, oppression means I always have food, a nice place to live, I've got lots of money, which, whatever that means, it gives me access to resources. But it is deeper than that. It's that idea of power, the idea of being able to have a say in my life. For instance, like, rich people get away with everything, unless they hurt another rich person badly enough where they have to go down. Like Bernie Madoff, if he had just cheated poor people, wouldn't have been in jail, right? But Bernie Madoff cheated wealthy people, and that's not allowed, right? It's not. So he broke the rule. There's honor among thieves. And so the idea that it's good to be on top because you get away with everything. I mean, look, we've got now 3 presidents who've been credibly accused of rape. Bill Clinton credibly accused of raping Juanita Broaddrick. Donald Trump credibly accused of raping the woman, I don't know her name, or if it ever came out, who she said she was raped by him in the presence of Epstein when she was 13, and E. Jean Carroll, who is credibly accused Trump of rape, and now Tara Reid, who credibly accused Joe Biden of sexual assault, which meets the federal definition of rape. So you can do anything you want, right? Harvey Weinstein got away with it for a very long time. And I think the dynamics of rape make a connect here when we talk about oppression, because there's a cruelty to oppression. If I can inflict suffering with impunity on another person or a group of people, I am not them. I am above them. I am separate from them. And there is that belief. So again, I believe, everyone's got their own view, that it's not just about access to resources and and some abstract issue of power. It's about, I can do whatever I want with impunity. I will be healthier. I never have to worry about anything. So like the really wealthy people and the super rich and powerful aren't worried about climate change, because no matter what happens, they think they're going to be okay. They're not worried about war. They're not worried about famine. They're not worried about the supply chain. They're not worried about anything. And that must be nice. And it is nice. And that's, that's what they want. And ultimately, like, I don't blame the individual people who uphold racism. I hold them accountable, but they didn't originate it. Who originated? Wealthy white landowners of European descent in this country invented blackness to justify their oppression of poor people and their exploitation of poor people and the land that they lived on, right? The idea of whiteness didn't exist for the longest time. You don't see references to being white in Europe in the 1400s or 1500s. It just wasn't, nobody said I'm white. You would say, like, I'm from Verona, or I'm from, I'm thinking of Italy for some reason. I'm from, Florence, Firenze. You wouldn't say I'm white. You wouldn't even say I'm Italian for the longest time, because it didn't exist as a country until the 1860s. So that idea of whiteness and blackness serves a purpose, because what the government was able to do, and the rich people who run the government, they were able to say, you white people over there, you're like me because our skin's very similar. See those black people? Those are the ones that are the problem. We're going to give you a little bit of power. And you know that history with that, but who does that serve? I don't know. I'm interested in what the other members of the panel.
Absolutely. Let's actually go to Dr. Karim. Same question. Why would a group of people want to oppress another group of people? You can just speak on it in general terms, or you can apply it specifically to this country and when you're answering it.
Yeah. So great stuff from Zenkus. I always love listening to him. I haven't anytime. I never noticed the moment that I disagreed with him. So he's already said a lot of things that I would like to say. But there is indeed, I think he says a very important point, and that is that elites have a disproportional influence on our culture. So I said in the beginning that I think culture plays a huge role in racism and oppression. And then Michael, right? Yes. Michael said that, well, I think the institutional structural nature is also very important. And I totally agree with you. And I, with culture, I actually you also mean cultural institutions and structures of society, but very good point. And I think what Zenkus said is so important to understand is that those who can oppress, it's like a kind of drug. It feels good to push down on other human beings and feeling better than them. It may sound very weird, because a lot of we as human beings also enjoy helping others or showing empathy and love and something like altruism. But it's definitely true that feeling better than the other plays a huge role in why racism as a system is also so easily maintained. And in psychology, we call it social identity theory. It's a relatively old theory from Europe. It's a European theory from Henry Teifel. And social identity theory says that the moment you create an identity for people, they have automatic tendency to positively distinguish that identity from other people. So the moment you create whiteness, the moment you created blackness during colonial times, I mean, let's not forget, it's not only the US, it's European, it's wide, it's all over the West. The moment you create it, then people want to positively distinguish that identity from other groups. It's a robust tendency among human beings. Multiple psychological studies repeatedly show that the same thing happens among different groups all around the world. And then there's another very important, simple theory for your audience. It's called minimal group paradigm. What happens is, it doesn't matter on what kind of distinction you put people into a group. Minimal group paradigm shows that you can even put people into a group because one person likes round glasses and the other group of people like square glasses. The moment you put them into two groups, they start to show in-group favoritism and out-group derogation. Now imagine that one group gets a bit of privilege, okay? That group starts to immediately cling on to their privilege. They do not want to lose that privilege. You see it. I've lived for 3 years in Malaysia. I've seen the colonial effects of putting people into different racial groups and letting them compete by giving different privileges. In Malaysia, you have three large groups: the Indians, the Malays, and the Chinese. Chinese had historically a bit more privilege than the Indians, for example. And what you see is true today, they cling on to that privilege and they keep on, you could even say, oppressing each other. Okay, so there is this continued intergroup competition. And in the end, what did it serve? Well, the elites who created that system, they reaped the benefits. Okay, during colonial times, putting people into different groups, black, yellow, white, and so forth, justified the exploitation of people who were classified as the other. And that is something you still see today. I mean, even if when you look at the royal family in the UK, the whole situation with Prince Andrew. I mean, you think that's surprising? I can go investigate for yourself. Check the royal family of Belgium, the royal family of the Netherlands. All these families have the same issues with sexual exploitation, oppression of children, sexual exploitation of children. So what I'm trying to say is that what Zenkus said is so important. There's the kind of sickness you see in human beings the moment they get absolute power over others. Okay, they start to enjoy it, and they want to maintain that kind of power. You see that among the elites, but you also see that among police officers, for example. The moment the police gets absolute power and almost no, how can you say that, no punishment for the way they behave, you will see that it's not that these people are specifically evil. It's somehow this tendency among human beings, the moment you get too much power over other human beings without any pushback, we turn into monsters. Now, not everyone. We do have people who are, how can you say that? You have a Mahatma Gandhi or whatever, but in general, people have that tendency. If you get absolute power, which you see with our elites, think about Epstein's situation, think about the police, not only in the United States, in many parts of the world, somehow that is like a kind of drug, and people start to oppress more. And who are always the first victims? Oppressed people, children, women, discriminated groups, and so forth.
The way you described just it's a sickness, I was thinking of, I forget his name, of Saudi Arabia, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia. That sort of
Mohammed bin Salman.
Is it MBA? Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that his name?
Yeah.
MB something they call him. But he seems to have that psychopath sort of, where he killed the reporter.
But they all have,
Khashoggi.
CJ. They all have
Yeah,
that. All the
but
royal
that's
family.
what I thought of. That's what I thought of when the way you're describing it. It's this like, and it's like he's happy. He gets off in this power that he has. And I just thought when you said that was the first person that came
Obama
to
did
mind.
too. Remember when Obama quipped that he was good at killing people?
Yeah, I mean,
I
guess the reason we, for us is so bizarre is because we don't have the absolute power, or we're just better human beings. I mean, I don't understand. There's no other way to really describe it. But let me bring in Dr. Michael into the same conversation. What is your take on, you've heard Professor Anthony, you've heard Dr. Karim, and what the question is: why would another group want to oppress another group of people? What is your response to kind of all of that?
I mean, I think this is a really important conversation because it's not often that I'm in a position to really speculate about like root causes. You know what I mean? I'm not a historian. I'm not a psychologist. And so I tend to really try to think about sort of what's going on now and why it's happening. And, so I feel like I can really speak to maybe not just motivations, but sort of like, what's actually happening and how is it impacting people. I think that
Absolutely.
the first thing is, I think it's very important what Professor Anthony pointed out, that race, it was invented for the purpose of racial capitalism. That the basic idea of it in the very beginning was to create distinct categories for valuing groups differently, for creating sort of a false sense of white solidarity by including people in that who otherwise would have been considered perhaps peasants or laborers who just happen to be of European origin, at least when it comes to the United States. And I would say, in terms of what continues it continues to be the same thing. I definitely have no doubt that there are specific psychological dynamics that are taking place in the mind of political elites. I think that there's certainly a lot of evidence of harmful and frightening things that we hear about when it comes to elites, and certainly a lack of accountability. And so I can definitely see that side of it in terms of how that could be potentially seductive. I think, on the other hand, we also have to consider, what motivation people have for collaborating in a system of oppression. Not everyone is a political elite. There are a lot of people who have various reasons for collaborating. I think one part of it is because the system is designed intentionally to distribute resources in a particular way, and to also create opportunities for certain groups while removing them for others. I mean, that's kind of by design. That's baked into the seeds of our political economy and how it's worked from the very beginning. I think it continues because there are people who are not elites that perceive themselves as benefiting, or perceive themselves as having sort of a sense of solidarity with elites. Not only in the sense of, like, in the United States, we have this idea that people think they're sort of temporarily embarrassed millionaires, and if Elon Musk has to pay his taxes, next the IRS is going to come for me or something. We already know that that's not true empirically, because poor people are way more likely to be audited by the IRS. But I do think that once you start forming these group identities and people buy into them, they can even kind of be ambient and background. I think one thing that's important here is how much of this is not necessarily about, like, what people consciously believe, but even just the very frames that they use to think about things. So I think sometimes about this concept of, like, hegemony and whiteness being hegemonic, in the way that we think about it as, like, a way of othering people that happens along racial lines, that can be done without whites necessarily even being super conscious or aware. It doesn't have to involve them having any overt hatred. It doesn't even have to involve them thinking of themselves as white and that meaning something. They are able to fully take for granted that the system is designed in a way that they will, if not benefit from, necessarily, like, because people are on the edge a lot of times, but that rather than thinking about how the system could be changed, they think, how do I navigate the system as it is? And I think that's what makes a lot of people willing to collaborate with forms of racial oppression, or to be part of it, because you don't really have political elites on their own, or just single individuals. Power actually comes from collective action. And so I think there's definitely a dimension here of sort of group dynamics, as well as, like, everyday people just trying to stay afloat and being forced to participate in these systems that are creating these outcomes.
Just
So yeah.
in the way you're describing that, I'm thinking of, poor peasant white people during the time that indigenous people are being slaughtered. What are you going to do? That creates a solidarity that I'm not one of them that's being killed, that's being massacred. In the same way as slavery, it's a creation almost by default. They're not selecting me to go out into the field. They're not selecting me to take to the barn and rape. They're not selecting me, and it's completely based off of this. So that creates a solidarity, even if they are all coming from countries where that never existed. You're coming from Italy, you're coming from Ireland, you're coming from, or at that time, you're coming from wherever you're coming from. It creates a solidarity in your new country, just based off of that. You're seeing, you know, these sort of atrocities being um, um, inflicted on people who don't have your skin type. So that automatically makes you kind of feel like then this skin is better because at least it's keeping me alive in that sort of way. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, you know, W.B. Du Bois kind of described this exact kind of dynamic in his work on the Reconstruction period in the American South, and he calls it a public and psychic wage, is what he calls whiteness. That even for those who weren't of the capitalist class or of the European aristocracy, for white laborers, just the fact that they received more public sort of positive recognition, that they were able to get some prestige by proxy. The psychic wage, I think, is very similar to what you know, my fellow panelists have been kind of mentioning, that this sense of privilege, this sense of being special, perhaps even chosen in some kind of way, that kind of toxic self-esteem boost is definitely part of, I think, what Du Bois means by the psychic wage. But I also think there's something to the public wage in the sense that if you can navigate your everyday life and be more likely to be given the benefit of the doubt in situations, or have a little bit more power when it comes to a conflict, that you can define the situation. I think that is a major motivating factor as well. It's just that people do derive perhaps a false sense of security from it, even though that we know capitalism is immiserating, particularly racial capitalism is also immiserating tons and tons of white people all the time. So even if there's not an economic wage that they benefit from, there are these other things that kind of draw people to it, and it allows them to even act against their own best interest, or even
Absolutely.
you know, form these false forms of solidarity.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Kareem.
Yeah, I wanted to jump into that, and there is this question if it's really against their own interest. For those of you who are interested, you can go to our channel and see the latest discussion we had with Funky Academic, and Nick Cruz from RBN, who actually said that, where we talked about that cross-racial collaboration, that class against class oppression. And I'll get back to that in a second. You made such a good point, Michael, about and I think it was also CJ, about the white peasants, and then they would see the oppression of indigenous groups and think like, okay, we are different. In fact, I can tell you interesting stories, sociological research on the Dutch colonialism in Indonesia, when the Dutch shipped a lot of Indonesians to the Netherlands, and of course black slaves. You would see that. You would hear stories, and probably in Britain as well, you would hear stories of literally groups from Indonesia, colonized subjects, being surprised to see poor white people. Like, what's going on here? These people are like us, you know? And the interesting thing is, don't forget, there was a gesture from the upper class. They created a middle class, and this middle class was predominantly white. And this predominantly white middle class, actually, this gesture created a kind of structural superiority in society towards people who are not classified as white. That is something that is changing now. With the neoliberal onslaught of our societies, even the white middle class is being destroyed. So you would think maybe we have a bigger chance of a cross-racial collaboration to fight class oppression. But then comes the question, does class really, even if you get less money, does class really trump the wages of whiteness? That is what we discussed with Funky Academic. Even if they take your money away, the elites, do you then wish to emancipate people of color, people who are marginalized in your society to an equal level as you? Or are the wages of whiteness so big, so good, that even when your economic situation is crappy, you still do not want to engage in cross-racial collaboration? And I find it an interesting
That's
question.
very interesting. That's very interesting. Yes.
I see repeatedly over history white working class people en masse choosing the side of oppression. So which really begs the question: hey, should we not start discussing the idea that racialized divisions are actually more attractive than deconstructing these divisions for class emancipation? It's something to food for thought, I think.
Can you say that last question again? That last part, that very last sentence again, to make sure I understood how you said it.
Yeah. So I said that are the wages of whiteness so high that cross-racial collaboration to fight class oppression is not as interesting than to maintain these racial differences. So the racial differences that are there are maybe even more attractive than deconstructing these racial differences to engage in class emancipation.
That is very interesting. That is something that's almost an entire episode in itself, but that is a very, very, yes, that's very interesting. I also wanted to ask, I wanted to ask you, Dr. Michael, I've heard you mention racial capitalism or racial capital. I think racial capital. Can you explain what that is before we move to the next?
Sure. Yeah, so this is a concept that comes out of the Black radical tradition in the United States and Caribbean, and essentially what it seeks to do is try to look at take sort of a Marxist analysis of history that also looks at the role that what people will call like racialism, these core divisions of the state essentially legitimating, like, okay, now there are these two distinct groups. And what scholars have traced back is that racialism was occurring in pre-capitalist Europe, but that it was basically transmuted from this kind of like ethnic hierarchy and ethnic strife that was taking place in Europe. It was transmuted towards the ends of capitalism after the Industrial Revolution and the invention of private property. So essentially, it allows us to see how it's not just that race and class are interconnected, but essentially it makes the argument that you can't have capitalism without some form of racial divisions or racial hierarchy, that there has to be some type of underclass, there has to be a dehumanized group that can be treated as surplus labor. Not only does that allow for like global expropriation, where we see like the global South having their resources, land, labor incredibly decimated and devalued. It breaks down the solidarity, but that essentially capitalism itself can't function under conditions of racial solidarity. And so I think that it allows us to put a different perspective on the political economy of racism. So how it also functions in an economic sense and how it functions in a political sense.
So much great stuff, but I'll let you jump in here, Professor Anthony.
Oh, there's so much to respond to now.
Yeah, it was some great stuff. I have to write some stuff down there.
Yeah, and so I was thinking about Karim's question that he posited, which is, are the wages of whiteness, do they trump the idea of class solidarity and the potential to overthrow a stratified class structure? And so I'm going to take the opposing view just for a second, but it's making me think, but I just want to look at one piece here. And that is in the 1920s and 30s in the United States, the Communist Party, did a lot, right? So there were thousands and thousands of people involved. And one of the things as we moved through the 20th century that the Communist Party, and if somebody's got the history down better than I do, please enlighten me. But as I've studied it, the Communist Party was consistently anti-racist. And you did have many, many, many examples of white and black people forging a class solidarity. So I do agree that under our current system, the wages of whiteness are very, very strong. They're very strong and hard to fight. But isn't it possible that that's because we have this system and nobody can imagine, well, not nobody, but so many workers cannot imagine a system other than what we have. And the other thing I just wanted to speak about, which connects to it, is the invention out of thin air of the illusion of the middle class. There's no such thing as a middle class. So I can prove that in 30 seconds talking to anybody who says, of course there's a middle class. So tell me, what exactly are the lower and upper income levels that make you middle class? Because nobody can say, right? It doesn't exist. It's an illusion and it's a lie. Middle class was invented by the capitalist owner class to destroy the working class, right? Because working class, and Marx talked about it. Granted, Marx was some years ago, didn't understand modern, it didn't exist the way our modern corporate structure works, but knew a lot anyway, right? He was a pretty smart guy. And I always saw him as more of a philosopher. And but Marx talked about the relationship that we have with capital, the relationship that we have with work, our relationship to the owners, the bosses. And whether you are quote unquote middle class or you are quote unquote working class, you are working class, both because we all have the same relationship, which means you don't show up to work, you can get fired, right? You get fired, you can lose your health care. You lose your job, I don't care how much money you make. Because people live they rise to they spend in, relation to what they earn mostly, right? So it doesn't matter if you make $120,000 a year or if you make $30,000 a year. If you're unemployed, you may lose your dwelling place where you live. So we are all
maybe a better term is a slightly less disadvantaged working class.
right. Yeah, and I'm not saying it isn't better to have the $120,000 a year job than it is the $30,000 a year job, because there is more security. But our relationship to work is the same in that we don't get to decide. It's not, work is, we're supposedly, most of the time that we spend in our lives is in the workplace, or now the workplace is virtual, right? And that was before the pandemic even. People, remember when there was only the BlackBerry? And people would be on their little BlackBerries and they're emailing their bosses, right? So you're expected to work every waking hour of your life. And that expectation is a form of wage slavery and control. So, what I'm interested in is, how do we connect? And this is maybe another discussion, in a revolutionary way, so that working class and middle class white people feel invested and connected to each other and to the struggle of Black Americans and then beyond our borders to the global South. How do we do that? Now, I think people should care and feel connected just because we're all humans. That would be nice, but I have to be realistic. And the last thing is that I just want to throw out is that it is no mistake. And again, I'm very hard on the Democrats because the Republicans, they're never going to get it, right? But whether it's Barack Obama, one of the worst presidents of my lifetime, whether it's Barack Obama or Joe Biden or any of the candidates that run, they all talk about the middle class. They never talk about the working class, and they rarely talk about poverty. And they do this for a reason. They want to let you know that they've given you a little privilege. And if you can hold on to that, you're going to be okay. And if you say anything about those other people over there that don't have health care, you know what? You might lose it. You might lose that privilege. Be really careful. Loose lips sink ships. right?
That is a great point. That's actually what I had. You kind of delved into what I had written down here, and that is, to me, the creation of the narrative of the middle class is to create a caste system of people that have bought into the capitalist system so that we can maintain it. Right. So it's like we're giving this people a little extra money to buy a couple of extra things because we need a certain amount of people fully bought into the system because we know this is terrible for everybody at the bottom. So it's a way of saying middle class. This is why, you know, they're always trying to pander to the so-called middle class. This is why you know, Democrats are always trying to get the suburban mom, the middle class vote, because it's harder to get the lower class because they are experiencing how capitalism and its system is not working. But people who have bought in, people who have a couple of extra spoils, are able to kind of say, "Oh well, I do have a 401k, so it can't be that bad. I got my retirement, so you know what I mean." Now those people are invested in the system and less likely to join a revolution or join a revolt. So I see your head shaking, Dr. Kareem. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Oh no, I was typing something that I was thinking
Oh,
of when you were saying, but I think you make some very good point, and that is the whole conception of the middle class is, of course, part of the divide and conquer game, and
yes.
this idea that you are part of the middle class makes you, and I get back to that psychological theory, social identity theory, makes you cling on that positive identity that you have compared to other people. And that is something that our cultures, the people who run our cultures, already learned during colonial times. You divide people up, you give some a little bit of privilege, and they will do everything to maintain that privilege, and they will not bind to fight their oppressors. I always say one of the most amazing examples is Malaysia. You know, it's a country that we usually don't think about. It's by accident that I started living there for a couple of years. And you just see the hierarchy from colonial times still today, with the groups who had privilege during colonial times still clinging on to that privilege. And the funny thing is, even when the middle class is disappearing, the so-called middle class Zenkus, I will try and avoid saying the slightly less disadvantaged working class. Now that the neoliberal onslaught has been so tough that even the so-called middle class is disappearing, they will start speaking of the white working class. That's what they do in Europe. That's what they do in the United States. We keep on. Okay, we cannot say middle class anymore because we're destroying these white middle class people, their lives as well. So what are we going to do? We say that we are listening to the woes of the white working class, and you're dividing people up again. It's so transparent, but it's very effective.
It's very effective and very clever. People don't understand how much of like psychology is put into how the ruling class does so much of what they it's hundreds, I mean, if not decades of years of understanding human behavior and what people are gonna react to. But let's kind of jump a little bit forward because I kind of want to find out what are some of the ways that the state can or is inflicting oppression. And I'll start with Dr. Michael this time. Like, what are some of the ways the state, or let me read the full question to you. What are some of the ways that the state and the American political system can enact oppression?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the big question of,
Mhm.
you know, what we actually want to identify. It informs praxis to actually figure out, you know, what are the things that are actually happening. I mean, in my work, I kind of focus on two big overriding concepts that I think we can fit a lot of different examples into. So on one hand, what the state does, and this is something we've kind of been talking about this whole time, but I basically say that the state creates boundaries. It creates boundaries between people. So those boundaries between groups, the state is literally like legitimating those boundaries. Uh, And part of that is also the boundaries of things like social empathy and prestige. So the state is inherently, and political elites are inherently reproducing a sense of who is deserving of the benefits of the state. There are so many ways in which the government benefits groups over others. And so those boundaries are not just about carving out groups, but ensuring that there is a state legitimation behind this sense of deserving, who deserves what. I mean, it's the same way that, you know, if you are a business owner, you can deduct your losses on your taxes, um, because the assumption is that you are deserving of that money. But if you are simply trying to eat, you are no longer deserving. Even though you could be a business owner who is horrible at running a business, runs it into the ground, you can still coop those losses. So we do have a fundamental sort of empathy gap that's being reinforced by the state. And I also think on top of that, what happens is that people from within the state, the political elites that we're talking about, they also like to erect and maintain barriers to who is able to influence the state. So on one hand, it's about who benefits. On the other hand, it's about who can influence this sort of decision about who benefits. So that's where we have the other side of it, where we see things like massive forms of political participation suppression taking place, both in terms of people. You know, I definitely think there's something about the way that people become perhaps traumatized, although I probably wouldn't use that language, but perhaps, you know, demotivated, disempowered, but also it just in terms of how difficult structurally it is to influence the outcomes. So you can have a policy like Medicare for All, for instance, which is widely popular and would widely benefit the majority of the public. But because there are so many barriers to the actual public, particularly people who have the most to gain from those types of programs, because there are so many barriers to them influencing the actual decisions that elites make, and because there is so much erosion of alternatives, both the alternatives we can imagine, but even the alternatives that are presented to us, those two things are reinforcing one another. There's kind of a feedback loop going on. So if you have this exclusion taking place, it means that you basically have a white state, a state that's operating in white capitalist interests. And when those boundaries are being redrawn about who's deserving of empathy, resources, benefits, who's part of what group, or which social spaces do we value, which neighborhoods and communities are going to receive resources and prestige, those decisions are being made in very exclusionary contexts. So from my perspective, I think those are kind of the two sites of conflict for people who are passionate about racial justice, is that on one hand, it's about those boundaries, which I think, you know, we've already talked about that a little bit, but just sort of overcoming that empathy gap, eroding those boundaries, re-articulating like who is deserving, and the ideas of that, you know, which I think is something people are very active in. At the same time, I think there have to be massive collaborations between groups who have a shared interest in dismantling these barriers, so that we can have at least something that is a semblance of democracy. So I would say that's kind of, yeah.
No, I was just gonna kind of follow up, like who is deserving, how, and I was just thinking how we are so many layers of how we're socialized to normalize who is deserving. Felons, you can't vote. You don't deserve to vote. Like felons deserve, like going to prison is the punishment. They shouldn't go to prison and get raped. They shouldn't go to prison. You get what I'm saying? But it's like you're deserving of it because you're the lowest on the bottom of the podium. So I'm just saying, like, and then people, then people are okay with it because the society is telling you those people deserve it.
Mm-hmm.
In the same sort of way, what's happening with the unvaccinated people here is like they deserve it. You deserve it's a way of yeah. So you get the point that I'm making. Let's bring in Dr. Kareem. So I'll give you a little chance to get settled, Zenkus. But how in what ways is the state able to inflict oppression? Oh, actually, let me read the question officially. What are some of the ways that the state in the American political system, so not just the state but the political system, also enact oppression? Now, before you answer, Dr. Kareem, so Dr. Michael kind of talked about how the structures are in place that kind of reinforce, oppressive boundaries or reinforce boundaries that are oppressive. So, how would you answer that same question?
Yeah, so I think Michael said some very, very good things. And um, he talks about the bidirectional nature between the oppressed and the system itself. So let's get an example. Who's deserving? How do we make that mental association about who deserves and who doesn't? And you said something very good, CJ. You said like it's amazing how we are socialized into thinking who is deserved and who doesn't deserve. Let's say about the prison system. Okay, the over it's overpopulated by people of color, in particular Black Americans in the United States. So deserving also goes into the negative way. Who deserves of higher prison
Mm,
sentences? That's Black people, for
mm,
example. Where does this come from? How come that that system is still there? It cannot be there without the support, the latent support of the population in some way,
mm,
shape, or form. Because it's the aggregate of individuals in the end, this society, and so you must have some kind of latent support for the system. Otherwise, you would have radical, well, maybe uprising and that kind of stuff, which takes a long time with human beings. That's a different discussion. But why is this so important that I notice you're saying socialized into this idea of who is deserving or not? Because we must not forget, I think this is an important topic as well. We must not forget the power of media
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
maintaining that system of oppression. Don't forget the media is being run by those in power and those with money.
mhm,
They have such an disproportionate influence on our psychology and shaping of culture through media, which is, I think, one of the most powerful factors of maintaining
mm,
racial hierarchies and indoctrinating us with the idea who is deserving or who is not. Just recently, there has come out a very good research in, let me see, in the UK, and I forgot which university it was, but it was about the severe Islamophobia in the UK, and the question why that is. And they call it the dinner table prejudice, the accepted kind of prejudice.
mm,
Why is that? Well, because our cultures have been so effective in shaping Orientalist and Islamophobic assumptions in the mind of people that that kind of racial
mm,
hierarchy gets latent support by its population. How? I think one of the most important factors is the media. What the media does day to day to us, not only to shape our ideas about other people, but also in oppressing ourselves, in seeing
mm.
ourselves as either deserving or less deserving or not deserving as all. And like I said in the beginning, and looking in the mirror. Some people look in the mirror and seeing features that are being continuously demonized in movies, in the news, and so forth, which also oppresses people internally.
So I had a question I wrote down while you were speaking. I forget what section of it, but I wrote down why didn't white people rise up during the massacre of the indigenous people here? Why didn't white people rise up? Like you have the elites doing these things, but if we're talking about the collective, you get what I'm saying? Like, why wouldn't the regular white people, because most white people didn't have slave owners or didn't have slaves, why wouldn't they kind of rise up? Is it because they were also being oppressed in a different way? Because they were peasants, they were just being treated as workers, so they were kind of working. You know what I mean? I'm trying to formulate what would be the reason. You get what I'm saying? Let's say this didn't exist. They just come and it just they see these Africans. Why are you treating them like? Why isn't that the reaction? Or do we know if that was the reaction in some cases? That was just a question. I don't know.
Yeah.
It was a certain part you were saying, Dr. Karim, and that was a question that I wrote down. I forget what section. So I'll try to remember. If that doesn't connect, if the question doesn't connect to anything that you were saying, I'll try to remember what it was, and I'll re-ask that question later.
Can I ask something?
Anthony, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Because if you're going to answer, Kareem, am I mistaken? But didn't white? I don't know maybe I mistook what you were saying, but didn't say white indentured servants and white exploited people hundreds of years ago start to rebel? And isn't that why the owner class decided to bestow some privileges on them?
Yes.
And so the true invention.
Oh, I get what you're saying. Let me just repeat what you said, just so make sure I understand. It's like at the time before the end, you got to understand that before this white concept of whiteness was really prevalent, before that, did they bestow, or what because of that did they bestow on the white indentured servants?
If I remember,
is that what you're asking? Is that what you're kind of bringing up? Go ahead.
And I think it might have been in Zen, but I've read it in other places too. So there were white indentured. I hate the term indentured servants because it was a lot more complex than that. And I know that Dr. Michael knows way more about this than I do. But those that were contracted slaves, regardless of their skin color, were treated basically in a similar way, as I understand it. And then there were some slave rebellions that would pop up here and there, and they weren't massive. It wasn't like a big army trying to take down the owner class. And that worried the owner class enough to say, all right, we've got to elevate this one group a little more than the other group. And I understand that the idea that there was racialism in Europe before it was in the New World. It wasn't a New World. The Native American indigenous First Nations people had been here for many years, but in what we call North America. But the invention of whiteness and blackness in North America, in the area that's now the United States, served a very distinct purpose. And I do want to kind of look at that trauma piece, because you asked, what does it do to us? And I think about a kid who's abused by their caregiver, their parent or parents. The kid can't leave. Where can they go? They're 11 years old. They don't have the means to survive or support themselves. They may not know that it could be better anywhere else, and sometimes it isn't. A lot of kids get removed from one abusive home and put into a foster home where there's some sort of abuse going on, right? And I think about the victim of intimate partner violence who lives with their significant other who's their perpetrator, and they may not feel that there is a safe way out, and oftentimes they're right. When they leave, they're more likely to be victims of severe violence or even an attempted murder or murder. Well, what does that do to a person? Well, it can be assault them physically, emotionally, psychologically, and destroy their social relationships and their ability to connect socially in positive ways. Make it hard to think, make it hard to sleep. It can destroy your immune system. To be under that level of stress and to be Black in America is no different than those situations I just described. To be lower class, poor, struggling, working class in the United States is no different effects-wise than those two things. Because one of the hardest things for humans to to feel is that they have no control whatsoever of what happens to them. Under capitalism, you have no control over what happens to you. Some people get a wider room that's controlled for them if you make more money, and for many it's very, very narrow. And for those, the bottom 30 to 40% are worried about daily survival. When you're in that survival mode, I mean, we evolved, our stress systems evolved for as a species, as mammals. We're in the ape family. The last time we got an update to our stress response system was somewhere around 20,000 years ago, pre-agriculture. So our stress responses weren't made to deal with the modern world. And what they do is they're meant to go up and down in a very, a short burst of time. I just watched a video of a skier somewhere in Eastern Europe trying to get away from a young bear that was chasing them. And I'm thinking, my God, I would be freaking out, right? So what happens is your heart rate pumps up, these chemicals get released. That's supposed to only happen occasionally. When you're poor, when you're Black in America, when you're a woman, especially in a situation where women are oppressed in the workplace or in a relationship, etc., your stress responses are going up all the time. And they're literally causing a toxic soup, which poisons the cells in your body, including the cells in your brain. That happens under capitalism. If you feel you don't have a semblance of any say over what happens in your life, this is always the way it's going to be. There's nothing that's going to be better. Franz Fanon talked about that, right? Mm-hmm. And the idea of that inner colonialization, he was talking about it in terms of race and Blackness, but that inner colonialization where we start to oppress ourselves. What does that do to us? It destroys us spiritually, physically, emotionally, and psychologically.
And Dr. Anthony, I'm thinking of the Palestinian kids when you say this. Like, you're growing up, you don't have a sense that this is it. Like, this is my life where I'm dodging bombs. Like, the trauma, the trauma that a person or children like that, or a child, that is, we live in a capitalist society, very materialistic, but has to go to school because, not has to go to school because, but goes to school, but don't have the nicest clothes because the parents can't afford it. They're ridiculed. Those types of things. Not having food on your table. It's
and nobody in the world
just traumatic. Yeah, and nobody cares, and it feels like nobody cares, or your loved one is murdered. We've talked about this. Thinking of Breonna Taylor's family. Like what are they doing? Just the trauma, just living through this trauma. It's terrible. I'm just saying, because
if I may quickly
go ahead.
For a moment. Yeah, it reminds me of a conversation I had with an Indian guy in Malaysia, Malaysian Indian guy, good friend of mine, and he's a dark-skinned Indian. And if you are dark-skinned in post-colonial societies, post-colonial between quotation marks, post-colonialism still doesn't really exist. Let's talk about territorial colonialism.
Yes.
In post-colonial societies, you see that severe skin color discrimination. I've written a couple of articles on that as well, and I've had long conversations with him, and he said the severe stress. And now I'm not even talking about the stress when you're in a poor social class and you struggle to get by to pay your bills and that kind of. I'm just talking about the pure psychological effects of internalized racism. So he's a dark-skinned Indian guy. He said he grew up hating himself, hating his skin color. In the bus, he would avoid sitting close to other Indians. Otherwise, he was afraid that other people like Malays and Chinese would see him as those groups of scary Indians. So he would avoid sitting close to other Indians so he would not be seen as part of that group. He would see people day to day crossing the roads when he walked on the pavement. People never smile at him, avoid eye contact, don't want to treat him normally. when looking around in a coffee shop, he sees other people being treated normally, people with lighter skin or people from a different racial group. And he told me actually literally this. He said, every time that happens to me, for example, he described a situation where he was in a Starbucks and he was trying to get a lady to help him, a Malay lady. And and he was trying to be friendly and he saw it. She could just not smile at him or even look at him. And then he said, right after that, a Chinese man walked in and she started immediately to smile and be very respectful. He said, these are little things that other people don't see. He said, but he said, I see that every day. I feel it every day. And he said, my heartbeat, every time that happens, my heartbeat goes up and I feel it in my throat. And it's so stressful. And he literally told me that. He said that I often just stay home, just to not have these day-to-day little interactions that just destroy me inside, he said. And I was just realizing how racism, especially when you are a prototypical target, just in your day-to-day interactions, the way you perceive people perceiving you is so destructive inside, so traumatic. And he told me that's the fight and flight response, right, Anthony? That he is that heartbeat inside. He gets anxious for just expecting what kind of treatment he gets from other people. That makes him super anxious and stressed. Every day he's home.
If I see the police car, I get that instant heart racing, and I'm not doing anything. I'm just sitting down. It's an instant reaction, involuntary, that I can't stop myself from having. So I completely can relate to that.
Important that it find it so important that that we talk about this and people finally start to understand that racism is not just like saying a bad word to someone else, saying the N word, and I shouldn't say it. No, racism is very, very deep. It's oppression on all levels, like Michael said, structural, societal, then psychological, behavioral, and everything you see. Like it creates as a discriminated person, the way you are treated day to day creates what we call mental schemas in psychology. So you have a schema of the world. You start to see behaviors according to that schema. So even neutral behaviors, you will see them in a negative light because you're so used to being treated negatively. So it perpetuates itself and you start to see the world increasingly negative. And that's extremely taxing on your being. You know what I mean?
Yes. I did want to kind of, unless somebody wanted to kind of say something I did want to ask Michael something.
I actually have to hop off.
Yeah, that's what I was just gonna say. I think you told me right around this time you needed to. That's what I was gonna ask if you needed to jump off. So, but thank you. We will be doing. We'll talk in the DM in a couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks, 4 weeks. We'll plan another episode to kind of go to the next step of this conversation. So thank you for joining, and we'll continue with Dr. Karim and Professor Anthony. So again, thank you for joining us, Professor Michael.
Thanks for having me. It's great to meet everybody, and appreciate the conversation. All right,
see you. Bye. So that's I want to thank him again. I know I just did when he was on, but having his added input was great for this conversation. But let's continue with a couple of more questions before we sign off here, and that is so we talked about how the state can inflict oppression. Actually, no, we didn't get your answer, Dr. Anthony. We didn't get your answer on how does the state inflict oppression? Does the state inflict oppression? And then how does it do that? In what ways?
It does. And I am not a doctor. I'm
sorry, Professor. Professor.
I just play one on TV. I profess things, but never did the work. I just want to give the people who did.
Absolutely. No, that was my mistake.
Everybody, I'm not insulted. Yes. My students sometimes call me doctor, and I'm like, sorry. No, that's the other professor who's better than me. But I will tell you, everyone who has their PhDs, anyone I know who got them, there'd be that point in time when they were working on their dissertation, and I would see them and be like, hey, how's it going? And they would all have these confused,
bewildered
on their face, as if they hadn't slept in 4 months, because they hadn't slept in 4 months, just looking at me saying, don't do this, don't ever do this. So I have profound respect. Now, that said, is the question, how does this
in what ways
oppress?
of the state
Ways
oppress?
does it
Like
oppress?
so like, for example, Dr. Michael kind of told us structurally how the government keeps in place things that are oppressive. But from your perspective, what do you see as oppressive? What is the government doing that's oppressive?
I think we can look to a little bit in pop culture to find out the answers. I think the prophet KRS-One said it very clearly. Whoop, whoop. It's the sound of the police. Whoop, whoop. It's the sound of the street. And if you read the lyrics to it, it talks about the feelings that he and so many others have living their lives where they lived when they saw the police. Right there. Like, if historians 100 years from now want to know what is it all about, listen to hip hop from the 80s and early 90s, and you'll get a very clear picture, and late 70s too, of what was really happening. Because right there is the divide. You could divide yourself into two kinds of people in this country: people who are relieved when the police show up, and people who are terrified for their fucking lives when the police show up. That's the divide in this country right now when it comes to this. So how does the government oppress? They do it with law enforcement. They do it with a corrupt court system designed to warehouse black bodies in for-profit prisons run by private equity companies that they own or have stock in. They oppress with corrupt judges that are part of that system who are racist. Not every judge is racist, but they oppress with those judges that are racist and uphold a racist system. They oppress with anti-democratic bodies. So the United States has never really been a democracy because we have a Supreme Court and a Senate, right? Supreme Court is the most undemocratic institution. Yeah. So the only time the Supreme Court ever talked about slavery, it said, yeah, it's pretty cool. We're okay with it, right? Wasn't that Dred Scott, right? And so the Supreme Court is trash. Everyone thinks it's so important. Maybe let's go back to 1803 with Marbury versus Madison and have a discussion. Should the court have this much power? Because none of those motherfuckers are elected. Okay? And even Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a profound, disturbing racist who shit on Colin Kaepernick as he lost everything. Colin Kaepernick had more courage than RBG ever had. And I'm sick of liberals idolizing privileged white racists. And why? Because the Supreme Court is an oppressive institution. The Senate is an oppressive institution. Our arrangement with work is oppressive. Everywhere we go, we are told we don't have say. We have to wait for justice. We know what James Baldwin said about waiting for justice. He basically said, fuck you. I'm not going to wait for justice. But he was way more eloquent. I love the way, if you are having a bad day, listen to interviews on YouTube with James Baldwin. Yeah, this man finds a thing, I haven't found it, a way to channel his rage through his intellect, and he speaks like an actor reading Shakespeare. And I'm like, how do you just say what you say? But here's the thing. American kids aren't taught James Baldwin. American kids aren't taught Bob Marley or KRS-One. Those are two prophets that I refer to, and I don't use that word lightly. We are taught the lie, and then the system continues to oppress. It starts in school, right? School is an oppressive, abolish the police. But thank you, Mr. Lincoln Stinkin. So policing just doesn't make any sense. And so we could do other things to capture people, right? Who are hurting others. But so that those oppressive institutions exist. So it's the police, it's the criminal justice system, it's the school system, it's the social service delivery system. I worked for social services. Let me tell you, the number of racist people that I worked with, the number of classist people that I worked with, the number of people who said, why should my taxes go to help that person get housing? And they were a housing examiner or a Medicaid examiner. Let me tell you, the systems are, not all of them. I've met wonderful people too, but it only takes a few to run the place and do that. Every system we have is a microcosm of exploitation. And just understand for a second, there's a group of people laughing their asses off right now. When they hear about racial tension, it makes them laugh. When they hear about potential war in the Ukraine, it makes them laugh because they are going to be good no matter what happens. And so one last thing that this rabbit hole is better for another episode, but I'll just tease it a little bit. We know that there's an evil group of people who control everything. We know this. They're elite. Some of them we know their names. Most of them we don't. How do they inoculate themselves against being talked about? They distract us with war, with poverty, with a poor response to a pandemic. Like there's no way that the response, my conspiracy theory, some people are like, oh, they made it alive. I don't know where it came from. I don't care. It killed 2 of my family members. COVID did. I do care that there's no way they're this fucking incompetent. There's no way it took Joe Biden a year to think like, oh, let's send people tests.
This is on purpose. This is on purpose.
Yeah, it is. The response is on purpose, just like the response to Katrina was on purpose. George W. Bush wanted poor black people to die in New Orleans. That was his wish, and he got it. When someone's 90-year-old grandmother is floating, and this man lands in New Orleans and says, last time I was here was quite a time, because he was talking about going there in college and getting drunk. The man, that people are dead and their lives and businesses and homes destroyed, and this is what he did. And the Democrats love George W. Bush. Michelle Obama, another one of the elites, embracing George W. Bush, the war criminal, the racist, right? So when we talk about the evil group that runs everything, they live longer than we do. There was a study once done. It's very easy. Anybody could do it. If you look at all the people nominated for Academy Awards and compare them with those that were nominated and won, there is an average 4-year life expectancy difference. So if you win the Oscar, on average, you're going to, and averages, people have to unpack what averages mean. I see Karim already going like, what does this mean?
Yeah,
on average,
means, but average.
On average, if you win the Academy Award, you live about 4 years longer than somebody who's nominated. What does it mean? The elites know this. They know the secret formula to a long, happy, stress-free life, and they do not want it to change. And how do they inoculate themselves against it? With the invention of the term conspiracy theory. And I think when I hear about groups like QAnon and all these BS groups, to me, all right, I have no proof of this, but it looks a hell of a lot like a psyop to me. Mm-hmm. Because if we can take the real thing that exists, elites run this place and they benefit from it. They're friggin' vampires, right? If we can say, let's develop a conspiracy theory which says that, but goes off the deep end and says that there's a child sex trafficking ring in the bottom of a basement of a pizzeria in Washington, D.C., then no one's ever going to question, right? And so that's the point. That's a ridiculous contention.
But they have an example of it. I mean, the Epstein Island is that. It's amazing that doesn't get traction then.
Thing.
Yes.
It's real. I mean, Comet Pizza is not, as far as I know, a child sex trafficking ring, but Epstein Island is. And who went there? Donald Trump. And who went there? Bill Clinton. And who hung out with Epstein in his apartment? And why did his wife, probably the main reason his wife, Melinda, divorced him? Bill fucking Gates, who's now running vaccine policy globally. So it is not conspiracy theory to say the royal family has at least one pedophile in it. The Vatican has quite a few, but they're protecting Ratzinger, the former Pope Benedict, who let it go on and probably did it himself. Hollywood is run. Harvey Weinstein, arguably the most powerful man in Hollywood before his fall. So we can look at the fashion industry, Hollywood, United States government, the royal family,
The
corporations
banks,
on Wall
J.P. Morgan,
The
Street,
banks,
the bank,
J.P.
Leon
Morgan,
J.P.
yeah.
Black
Morgan.
from banks are fucking pedophiles. And it's, look it out. It's in the news. These people are like, they have to step down from their position, but none of them are in jail. They are literally.
And this is the point of oppression.
Yes.
This is the point. It's so that they can live however the hell they want to live. But we all have to follow these set rules. And I mean,
why? And then the last
absurd.
point: slave owners raped. I hate the term. The criminals who stole human lives from Africa raped those human lives that they called slaves. They raped them for a reason. When our troops go over to Afghanistan and Iraq and all those countries, Somalia, and they rape 11-year-old girls, it's not because they're sexually aroused. Rape is a tool of oppression and power. It was used by the slave owners, it's used by our military, and it's used by the people who run our government. And, it's two sides of the same coin: capitalism, exploitation, rape, all of it. This group exists. And the last thing that's it.
Well,
Go ahead, Dr. Karim.
I would like to dispute the last part slightly. I think because it lets often the perpetrator off the hook. I think a lot of them do get sexually aroused, and I think that whole power dynamic is the reason why they do it, and that gets them sexually aroused. There is a reason why these depraved multi-billionaires, why pedophilia seems to be such a big deal among this group of people. And I must say, we had a very good show on this on the International Leftist Coalition with Nick and Josana a while back about the sexual depravity of the elites. So people can find it on your channel, CJ.
Absolutely.
But I think it's you can also question yourself, why is it that somebody like Cornel West gets booted out of Harvard? Okay, a man who stands up for the humanity of other human beings, but somebody like Dershowitz, who is buddy with the whole Epstein situation, is still there. That is that whole elitist system propping each other up, to keeping each other safe. And that brings me to what you just said, CJ, about how Bush is being propped up now, or maybe it was Zenkus. Bush is being propped up by the liberal class and being celebrated. Don't forget, this is an age-old phenomenon that is part of European colonial culture. This is the exact same thing as building statues for these slave owners. It's like how can you say that? Reinventing these oppressors to create a kind of history that keeps people oppressed. You know what I mean? To create this myth of a great history of your society. Same with Bush. Bush is now being, how do you call that?
Reimagined. He's being reimagined now for the history books, so that the history books are going to say exactly who he is and what he was.
And that is the same thing as what you saw with the statues of slave owners. And I would want to say one last thing is that the laws that we have, it was the same as with religious rules back in the day. These laws are not there to control the powerful. The laws are there to keep the common folk in check. It's very simple. If you steal a handbag of a lady on the streets, man, you go into jail for years. But if you steal billions, or you on purpose keep the whole world in a health crisis for profit, nothing happens to you. You go to an island raping children, nothing happens to you when you're part of the elite. But you are a person from the common folk, and you smoke a joint, or you do, or you steal something, and you steal bread from the supermarket for your children, they're gonna get you.
That is so eye-opening. But the reason I don't think a lot of people get it, one, critical thinking is not necessarily a strong suit of Americans, and I think we've been conditioned to be that way, is a lot of Americans simply can't even imagine the corruption and the terrible things that our government and the ruling, like, they can't fathom this level of I guess the word depravity. They just can't fathom it. So it's for a lot of people, to go back to the conspiracy theory thing, why it kind of falls into conspiracy theory is because they've bought into the propaganda that our government is doing good, that our government is the hero on with the white hat on the white horse. So yeah, go ahead. It looks like you were gonna say something.
Oh no, not me. Maybe Anthony.
Oh, I thought I heard somebody say
No.
say something. My bad. My bad. So I did want to kind of break the conversation here. I didn't want to necessarily go into another big topic that may take us another 40 minutes, because I'm not sure what you have to do over there, Dr. Karim. Your day just kind of started over there, so you may have, to teach or do whatever you have to do for the day. But I did kind of want to sum up this first episode. We wanted to kind of examine what oppression is, as a starting point for this series, and talk about the oppressor, talk about the dynamic of the oppressor, talk about the traits of the oppressor, and then also kind of discuss like ways that the state inflicts the oppression. In some future episodes on this topic, we want to go into more of the traumatic effects of what the government is doing, like the real world effects on somebody, the amount of conditions, the amount of suicides going up, that type of thing. And then I don't know if this would be in even further future episode. But I also kind of wanted to talk about, if this is something in your field, ways for oppressed people, because you're living in a stress level that doesn't dip a lot. So ways for oppressed people to live, like how are the people in Palestine, how are those kids surviving mentally without just falling apart? Like what things do oppressed people do to cope while we're struggling, while oppressed people are struggling? Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just, the thing you made me think of is the thing that helps us survive. And, I'm not putting myself in a category with people struggling in Palestine under the murderous apartheid regime of Israel. But the thing that helps us survive in those instances is the actual thing that can help us have a revolution and change politically what's happening. And that is human connection and community connection and solidarity and community building. Mm-hmm. Those are the only things that have ever worked. And it's the exact thing that the people who run this place try to stop all the time. If you remember the laws that I know we learned about that existed during slavery, they wouldn't let Black people congregate and speak in public. Now, why? Because they were afraid if people talked, they would say, "We're getting a bum deal. We need to coalesce and change this." Right? They're doing it now with suppression on the internet, on all platforms. The idea that like you can't ask a question about medical policy in this country without being termed, what is it, anti-vax, right?
Yeah.
Like, I ask questions about medicines. I don't take a lot of medicines. I got vaccinated, whatever. It was my choice. But I also don't understand why I would classify another human being by whether or not they took a certain medicine. That's just bizarre. But like, how do they break us apart? They divide us. They make us so exhausted that we can't concentrate on connecting people. If you're exhausted and hungry and beaten down, how do you connect with your neighbor? Oh, and then let's take this pandemic that happened and respond to it in the worst way possible so that people are shut down for 2 years. You think that's not by design?
No,
Again,
that's
what
on
I'm
purpose.
talking specifically about is their response. There is no difference between the response of Joe Biden and the response of Donald Trump to this pandemic. None. And so, in
I
fact,
mean,
well,
just
there
think
is.
about that. Think about that, Anthony. People are dying. They're claiming they're caring, but there's no discussion whatsoever about extending healthcare to everybody.
No,
Hey,
there is.
hey, go see a doctor, everybody. Go see. We're in a pandemic. Go see a doctor. There's absolutely zero discussion
There's an
about that.
interesting piece here. So I've looked at the research. The unvaccinated are more likely to be uninsured. So the government knows this because it's their own research that they fund, and they know this. So when people say like we want more people to get vaccinated, it's like no, actually you don't. I know you don't because you know that people that have doctors are more likely to be. And I'm not going to argue about whether the vaccine's good or not. The point is that every step along the way, they try to divide us physically, politically, racially, because they know that when we're exhausted and distrustful of each other, we cannot come together. I will recommend a YouTube by little talk that Johan Hari, Hari, did, and it's called "The Secret of Happiness," and it is the best 20 minutes I've ever spent on YouTube watching why community matters and how it can save us, and why. And my piece is the government absolutely does not want that to happen.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And so, Doctor Kareem, you heard kind of what Anthony said. Did you have any comments on what he said before I kind of ask the final question here?
No, actually, I was thinking the exact same thing. I think the buffer against all of this is indeed community. I mean, we all remember the times when we were younger and we were hanging out with our friends around the barbecue, and just that feeling being among people that you can feel safe with. Same as like your family. You can just completely
Hmm.
be yourself, not worry about anything, and they have your back. I mean, that stuff is it's such a powerful buffer to any kind of stress or mental issues that you have. So I fully agree with Zenkus here.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out a way because we can, we can identify the issue, we can, perfectly describe it, but once we get to that, then what? Like it's hard to just discuss it and not say how do we help these people? And that's the reason why I'm saying talk about solutions. We have to keep talking. And the thing is, what people in the struggle in the revolution have to understand, we just might be the genesis of the revolution. We may not see the revolution through. We may be part of the revolution that gets it started, or the educational stage. People just think the revolution is going to be a couple of months and there we go, everything's great. No. So just keep that in mind. As far as the frustration level, a lot of people were frustrated. I know I am. You want to help as many people as you can. But I think a lot more people are waking up. I don't know if you two are experiencing that, Dr. Kareem, if you're experiencing that. What gives me hope is seeing more people say, yeah, this doesn't seem, this capitalism or whatever the situation, doesn't seem like it's supposed to be going this way. And I'm just hoping more and more people wake up. But I do think the ruling class, the oligarch, they know that's the reason why they're preparing militarily with our police. They know people are eventually going to go, yeah, we're done with this. So yeah, we've come to the final 5 or 10 minutes of the episode. um, I do want to give both of you the opportunity to reflect on anything, like, because I know sometimes when episodes go, I'm like, man, I wish I had time to say this one part that was on my mind. So I do want to give you that opportunity. If there's something that slipped, a comment or point that you wanted to make before we give our what's coming up next kind of line. I'll give you that opportunity. Dr. Anthony, I'm sorry, Professor Anthony, did you have any last parts that you wanted to include before you tell me what you got coming up next?
Sure. I think about a video I use as a teaching tool. It's on YouTube. And many people have seen it. And it's the video of the young black girl having to choose a doll, to choose between a white doll and a black doll. And you see the psychologist who's doing the experiment ask, which doll do you want? Pick one of the two dolls. And the little black girl picks the white doll. And she said, okay, now point to the doll that's good. And she points to the white doll, and point to the doll that's bad. I mean, I encourage people to watch it. Trigger warning, it's horrendously traumatic. How does a little 8-9-year-old girl think that because of her skin color, her phenotype, the way she appears to others, that she is less than, that she is bad? Where does that come from? Is it natural? Well, we know that it's not genetic. You're not genetically racist. Is it just that people, when they get together, are terrible to each other? Oh, this is a little too organized for that. It's on purpose. We destroy the souls and lives of the oppressed because it benefits a few people who run this place. Like I said, they're laughing right now. So what do I want to say is that our trauma is real. And the only way, I've worked with trauma victims, people who were raped by parents, people who had horrible things happen to them. And the thing that always worked for them to move through their trauma was coalescing and coming together in a group of others, right? That's how we survived this place, this hellscape America that we're in right now, this simulated virtual hell that we're in. We survive it by coalescing. There is no other way out. If COVID was a puzzle, we're failing, because if it was a test, we're failing. I do believe it's a test, right? And if people believe in God or whatever they believe, here's the test. Can you work together? Can you have long-term instead of short-term thinking? Can you put profit on the end of the line and human lives and well-being at the front of the line? Those three things. This is the only way out of COVID. Can we work together? Well, apparently we're failing that one because we won't share the vaccine with African nations, right? So I guess fuck them, right? Sucks for them. Oh, I'm sorry, the virus would like to have a word, because that's where variants start, right? And then the second thing is, can we engage in long-term thinking and not short-term thinking? Are vaccines the only way out of this? Glad we have them, but maybe we need to work on other things too. And then the third thing, can we put profit all the way in the back, because it shouldn't be there? Like, coming together is the only way that gets out of anything serious. And the last thing I want to say is, I know I made some really intense comments before about who these people are that run this place. And I do believe, my belief, I'm allowed to have a personal belief, is that these crazy conspiracy theories that exist are meant to take away any real critique of what's going on. So do I think the royal family are really lizard people? No. But take their mask off and tell me what you see, right? It's a metaphor. These people are bloodsuckers. These people are vampires. These people suck our labor and our energy. They laugh when we are hurt. They don't care. They like division. They like war. Right? So I've got more in common with somebody in the Ukraine in the working class, or in Russia in the working class, or in Iran, or in anywhere in the world than I do with an oligarch in this country. And yet people are asked to go fight and kill. We're sending Biden, the psychopathic rapist racist, is sending 3,000 troops to Europe right now. The man's going to die at some point, right? He's more toward the end of his life than many people are, right? He doesn't care. Even if nuclear war doesn't happen, he doesn't mind dancing around it while we all sit and think, are you out of your mind? So my last thing I'll just say is this. I believe this. the time of the elites is over. It's actually been over for a while. They know it, and they're terrified. We are starting to wake up to that fact, and they are running out the clock. There are far more of us than there are of them. People are sick of it. People get it. Everything that you see on CNN and MSNBC and Fox, Washington Post, New York Times, legacy media, it's all a show. It's all a show. It's a dance to make us think it's still the way it was. And it's not. There's going to be a shift. And when that shift comes, and it's starting now, these people aren't going to know what hit them. And my preference and my belief is that is going to happen in a sustained, confrontational, disruptive, nonviolent way. I believe strongly in that. Trauma will be healed by us coming together.
Absolutely. That is a profound statement. Community is very therapeutic, very healing, I think. So I'll give you the opportunity also, Dr. Karim, if there was some last chunk of information and you get a chance to share or a point that you wanted to make. And then I'll circle back and just get, are you appearing anywhere else? Are you going to be on any other streams before we sign off here? So Dr. Karim, was there any point that you missed or or something else you wanted to say before we do that?
No, I want to end here. I think Zenkus gave such a good last monologue. I have nothing to add. I just fully agree with that.
Absolutely. So then tell us, Dr. Karim, where can somebody see you? What work are you doing? Are you working on anything in particular that we can direct our audience to go check out? I know we're going to be doing the international, I think we're going to call it the International Solidarity Summit, and I know you're going to be helping with that. But any other items that you're going to be working on?
Well, we are in our small channel, Bad Beat Media, of course. I'm working. Most of my time still goes into my academic work, so I'm working a lot on teaching and writing papers and doing research. So hopefully soon an interesting paper is coming up on the cultural antecedents of microaggressions. So the fact and the way we interact with people of different racial phenotypes. Where do they come from? Well, I made a case for cultural, psychological reasons, and hopefully the paper comes out soon. Maybe we can discuss that sometime. I hope to definitely talk with this panel again soon. And tomorrow, if I am not mistaken, I will be on with Josanna and Nick. And
yeah, he told me about that, yes.
Right, and Peter. For the International Leftist Coalition, we've been on a hiatus for a while, so it's good to have the team back. And
yes.
So I guess that's for tomorrow, and then that's it. Nothing more.
Absolutely. Yes, they did mention that when I mentioned this, that we're doing this. He said, "Oh yeah," and then I have him on Thursday. I think it was Monday when I was talking to Nick about that. He was actually going to make this one, but at the last minute something came up. He wasn't able to make it. But yes, and Professor Anthony, what do you have on the horizon? What are you working on? Yeah.
Is Nick mad at me? Is that why he did? Is that why he
did?
No. Like my therapist is on vacation, so this stuff comes out. I don't have a lot coming up that people can tune into. Whenever you find people invite me on to speak, and both of you have had me on your podcasts, I'm happy to join. So nothing to say. Watch my Twitter if you want to be entertained by how liberals respond negatively when you talk about saving 68,000 lives a year by enacting Medicare for all. I just got called a spineless, I don't know what today, by some privileged woman who just didn't like that idea that I said we should have Medicare for all, and that matters more than whether or not we pick a black woman for the Supreme Court, which is a completely undemocratic institution. But besides that, so I don't have anything coming up, but I can say what I'm doing. I am teaching. I started 2 weeks ago teaching my trauma courses at Columbia School of Social Work. So I'm very excited about that. And, we're talking about trauma, race, of sexual violence and abuse and all that, but we're also talking about trauma of racism and classism and all of that stuff. And I have to tell you, my students for the past 2 years in this shutdown, I get emotional talking about it, have been so amazing, right? So I'm going to have my first in-person class tomorrow.
Oh,
We'll all be
wow.
masked. But Karim, you get it. Like, I've done the Zoom thing for 2 years, and the students have been amazing. They've really, really made it work, because it couldn't work if it were just me. So I am excited, a little nervous to have my first in-person class, I guess, in 2 years. So I'm excited, and I'm teaching about trauma and just connecting with good people. But where do we connect? We connect on social media. We do what we can with what we have right now. But it'll be the spring soon. We'll kick this virus's ass, and we'll be in the streets, because it's time. It's time, people.
Yeah, I feel like it's time too. And what I can say for both of you, yes, we will be doing, episode 2 in this series. So we will plan something. It's not going to be next week, or maybe not even the following week, but we will, look at everybody's schedule and schedule something, and have a follow up to this. Uh, we're doing it chronologically and in a particular order, so that's kind of like what we're working on. So look for that second episode. Check out the International Leftist Coalition tomorrow, Thursday, along with the roundtable is also tomorrow. And then Friday is the Sabby Sab show. Saturday is Nick show. He'll be on, I forget who he said. And then Sunday is the JB show. I'm back here on Monday with Nick and with the Nick and CJ show. Just want to shout out everybody in the comments. I know these types of conversations, I have less time to get your comments on the screen, so I do apologize for that. These conversations, I do have to listen a lot more intently. So that's what happened today. But I tried to get a couple up there, but those listening or watching on Rockfin, those on Twitter, thank you for all the comments. Thank you for the super chats. I think I covered everything. Make sure you support us. We are trying to get to 15,000. Believe it or not, I don't know if you heard, the two of you, but we were doing 1,100 follow. I think Nick told me he talked to you about it, Dr. Kareem. So we were doing 1,100 like subscribers, and then literally after the summit, the very next, it just stopped. And like, I don't know what happened. And I mean, we do know what happened. Obviously, we're now on the radar of YouTube and what we're doing. So yeah, so please subscribe if you like the content. Share on all platforms, share our videos. Follow us on Twitter, on the scrolling bar there. If you are able to donate, you can or contribute. You can support us financially on Patreon. We're trying to get some other avenues. We're trying to get a PayPal. And I think that's all I got. I want to thank my 3 guests for joining me, and you will see the 4 of us back again in the near future. Thanks again. I'm signing off right here.
Mark Zuckerberg is a